Good morning. Welcome to day 2 of Bridging Connections NSSRS to Advisor, the Data Conference 2018. It is indeed a pleasure to have everyone here with us this morning. We had a great, I think, kickoff yesterday. It was sort of an unusual, unorthodox approach of having everybody in the same room for the whole afternoon. But I hope you felt that you gained some knowledge, some value, had some questions answered, and an opportunity to better understand some of the work that's been going on. So hopefully with maybe a thumb up in the air across the audience, if that was a part of your yesterday afternoon. Okay, great. I see at least a couple of them. Very good. So for those of you that are familiar with sort of this journey, about 4 years ago, in fact, it was the summer of 2014, we met with a whole set of vendors, SIS vendors at ESU3 to kind of lay out the path of where we wanted to go in Nebraska. And so this was an opportunity for the student information system vendors to come in, hear the story, talk through what the options were, understand a little bit more about this notion of EdFi and the API and the automation process, and kind of lay out our path for where we wanted to go. Because the vendor partners were and are a critical piece of this puzzle to make this work. There's simply no way the Department of Ed or each and every school district would be able to figure out and manage and maintain and sustain the operational connectivity. And so the vendor partners are critical in this work. And so the journey at that point started. And there were a couple of other states that were also beginning that same process. They had what we would characterize as big sticks. They had, like, the entire school funding was contingent upon creating and implementing. We used the Nebraska nice way. And while that's a wonderful thing, it sometimes took a little bit longer. However, we are thrilled and pleased with the partnerships that we have with the vendors working in the state of Nebraska. One of those vendors that was there that day in July was JMC. And JMC is, I'm proud to say, a sponsor of the morning breakfast. So we'd like to recognize them. So if you would give a round of applause. So this morning, we have an opportunity to hear from two very knowledgeable, very wise, very talented individuals. They're going to have a conversation, and hopefully the conversation unfolds in a way that provides great value, insights, and perspectives. And so I'm raising the bar of expectations. We have with us Dr. Lee Jenkins. For some of you who are familiar with some of his most recent work in authoring books and consulting on the L to J approach. And then we also have the Commissioner of Education, Dr. Matthew Bloomstead. They both are very steeped in understanding data and passionate about making a difference in the lives of students and kids. And so we have an opportunity for them to talk and kind of share and have a conversation with all of you today. So would you please welcome our esteemed conversationalists.
Okay, let's get this going. Yeah. So I thought, first of all, I have Lee very, very nervous here today because one of the things that I think is so important for us to think about in data is really finding a way to motivate and think about the system. And I wanted to kind of introduce all of you to Lee, perhaps in this fashion, because it's probably a slightly different audience than Lee might normally get. And I realized this yesterday as Pam Taggart was talking and said, finally a real data conference, and there was the applause from many of you who are the data stewards and many of you across schools that have that responsibility of getting data reported to the department. And I think over a period of time, I think it's been 10 years that we've run this data conference. And so it's changed over time. And we implemented NSSRS, and now here we are moving to advisor with this notion of how we automate some of the data uploads and some of that particular work. But I was curious if you could raise your hand if you are not a teacher and not a principal and not otherwise certificated, that you're actually working at a school district in a different type of capacity.
Okay, that's a big group.
So yeah,
I'm glad you did that.
Yeah,
Yes.
so that perspective is there. Now, if you'd raise your hand if you're a teacher, principal, or superintendent in the room.
They're in the minority.
Now, would you raise your hand if you didn't raise your hand otherwise? And I don't know who you are. Oh, a lot of them are the department staff. I see. One thing I just think as we go through this that it really takes a lot of us playing very different roles. And I've had the great pleasure of knowing Lee for maybe a decade or so. Lee has written several different books that really, I think, are used pretty broadly within Nebraska around school improvement and how we think of using data to improve education and ultimately those types of things. But your first book, I think, and well, maybe there was another one, but Permission to Forget, right?
Yes,
This notion of root causes and how we use data to really think about education is so critical. And then
Well, if you think just a root cause, I mean, it's not a good use of data to take a chapter test on Friday and on Saturday have no idea what you spent the day before. It's not very good data.
is that not good?
It's not good data. Yeah.
And so for us, as we kind of go forward in building this data system, and I've joked with Dean before this notion, Dean, I don't know why you're so nervous. I could probably say the whole thing to our data team, right? I don't know why you're so nervous because this data thing's just a fad. I'm pretty sure the feds aren't going to ask us for data anymore, and the state's certainly going to quit doing that. But one of the key important parts, and this is what I want to ask Lee a little bit about, one of the things is we're using data at a lot of different levels. And so we have what our state reporting roles and all those things, which really that's what our big data systems are tending to be about, of how we get that data reported. But we're also looking for ways to really become more efficient as a system so we can spend our time doing what's most important from a classroom perspective as well. So maybe you can kind of talk about some of the data.
I like what was said earlier about the stick and then the nice, okay? Because data are like baseball bats. You can use them for joy or you can use them for harm. And so when you say we want to do this nice, that means that from the commissioner on and the other people, the supporting staff, they want to use data to help kids, not data to harm kids. I was with ESU 1 in January, and I told the audience, if you want to send a note to me during the day, I'll read it at break. And I got a note from a teacher who said, I decided in kindergarten that I was dumb. And I've been thinking that for 30-some years. And the reason was there was a sticker chart on the wall, and I couldn't ever get as many stickers as my friends. And I decided at 5 years old I was dumb. That's data for harm. And we want to use data for joy. And it's a mindset. How do we use it? And that's true all the way around. We want to use the data. And so I've heard your commissioner talk so many times about it's not the ranking of a school system, it's did they improve? That's what he's interested in. And the first time we met, and we had a radar chart, and Katie was putting that together for us, and he asked about a certain district that had a history of struggling. And he didn't ask, how are they doing compared to other people around? He asked, did they improve? That's what he wanted to know. That's data, using the data for joy instead of data for harm. And that's just permeating the system. That's what we want.
So we think often about our various roles, and the State Board of Education, and within their strategic plan, came up with various roles where we should be a champion, we play a regulator role. Often I think data gets associated with the regulator role, kind of that stick role. But really we want to be a connector, and bridging connections is part of that, using data to be more effective as a state. Thinking about how we're a capacity builder, how we use data actually to be able to work with others to improve the capacity of the systems at each level, all the way down even to a classroom level. And then really we want to be a change agent, that we use, I think in particular when I'm talking about data, that we use it well and we use it to motivate people and not demotivate. And so a lot of the importance of gathering this information and doing it as efficiently as possible gives us time to play those other roles in particular, that we can study that. But you even see that at a classroom level, I think, when they have the data and they're able to use it in a fashion to motivate students. Could you give a couple of stories how that might work?
I was working in Ruidoso, New Mexico 2 weeks ago. I was in a 5th grade class, and I was introducing data that does improve intrinsic motivation. And so it was just before lunch, and a 5th grader said to the teacher, "Can we have another quiz?" And the teacher said...
Did you catch that, by the way?
Yeah. And the teacher said, "If you behave after lunch, I'll let you have another quiz." Now, when have you heard that before? Now, she has great classroom management. There was no doubt but what they were going to behave. But it was just a way of saying it. And so that's using, in other words, the data set up so that the aim is to do better than you've ever done before. That was what the student was thinking. If you give me another exam, I might be able to do better on it than I've ever done before. We call that all-time best. And they want that. They want that to do, it feels good on the inside. I did my best ever. And so, yes, that data can be used that way. And it's the same with you're looking at data for the school or looking for the school district. Did we do better than ever before? That's what we're after. And it works with the students, and it works with the, yesterday in a school in South Sioux City, the students calculated the effect size in mathematics, and for every classroom in the school, and they were able to celebrate that the effect size for all of us together, the whole faculty. How did we do all together as a team of teachers? It's what John Hattie would call collective efficacy. Look what we did. So it's from kindergarten students through 12th grade students, and then it's the teachers, and it's that same mindset of let's improve, and let's have evidence that we improved.
So for those of you who are data stewards, and maybe you can raise your hands again so I can see where you're at. So those who are just in that role of data steward, not a teacher, not in the classroom otherwise. For those of you who are in that particular role, what do you spend time with students? Keep your hands up if you have your hand up, right? So students are real and in front of us, and what I try to talk about with teachers of trying to keep teachers motivated around this, and sometimes we use data from that notion of, oh, it's going to be bad. Actually, and teachers, maybe raise your hand as well. If you're in the, can you raise your hand for a second just so I can see kind of where everyone's at. This notion of how we motivate teachers to use data in a way that's really effective is also important. But sometimes, this is my observation, we go around the state and that data is not immediately available to teachers, right, in the same way. Or we report that data and it comes up to the department, and then, in our magical, mystical way, we can come up with some way to report it to the, is that about right, magical, mystical way that we report it to the federal government? Because I'm not really sure exactly how that works either. But the fact of the matter is, as we send it there, we find we're spending our time really just almost all of it in getting it reported, sending it up to the next level, and I like to say that so they can send us a report to tell us how we're doing. And that seems backwards to me, because I think what we want is to be able to think about how we're using data as effectively as possible to motivate students in a classroom environment, make decisions about what's really best. And so when I think about that at a classroom level, it's different than maybe what I need at a state level. How do you think about motivating a system from that perspective? Because that's, I guess, my job. I have to think of ways that we motivate a system to be energized to do the right things.
Okay, the kids start out kindergarten with all of the intrinsic motivation they need for life. And our job is is to maintain that motivation. Even in my second session called AIM, AIM stands for Accelerate Intrinsic Motivation. What do we do to keep accelerating that intrinsic motivation they come with? And then we look at teachers. Going back to your question, they start out their first year of teaching with all of the intrinsic motivation they need for their whole career. And then things ding and ding and ding, and they lose it. And one of the ways that we can demotivate the people working with our students is with data. And there was it's actually a part of our society. Edwards Deming, who lived from 1900 to 1993, and actually is the one that took the Japanese management to Japan in the 50s. And he said that he asked CEOs, he gave them a choice. He said, here's your choice. You can have 10 million profit, more than ever before, and be in second place in your industry. Or you can have 5 million extra profit and be second place in your industry. Oh, I'm sorry, first place. You can have 5 million profit. Let me get this. Let me start over. Get this right. You can. Okay.
I'm not following you, Lee.
Okay. You can have 10 million profit and be in second place, or 5 million profit and be in first place. And many of the CEOs said, I'd rather have 5 million profit and be in first place in my industry than be in second place with 10 million. That was the mindset of lots of the CEOs, that it's more important my ranking than my improvement. Okay? And so that's for the same for the schools. We have to get that notion out. It's not about me compared to somebody else. It's me compared to my former self. And when the messages come from the commissioner and other people that support him about congratulations on your improvement, that's what keeps people motivated, as opposed to, that district over there, they really nailed it, and you guys need to get with it. That is demoralizing. Doing better than my former self is key in the use of data, and it's true all the way. It's the teachers, principals, everybody. And to hear the congratulations, at the church that I attend, the Easter was our best Sunday ever. It wasn't the pastor saying we have a goal of getting to this number. That wasn't it. The goal was just to do better than we've ever done before. Okay, and that is so healthy, and we celebrated that, better than ever before. Okay? And so, in our culture, there's more of a, if you do this, then I'll do this for you, instead of just do better than before, and we'll celebrate that. So celebration is different than a incentive. It's a thank you. And data is one of the key things we use for celebrating.
So for the department, and we had a group of leadership that met with Lee maybe about a month ago, I guess, or somewhere in there, and we talked a lot about thinking about setting goals and how we would do that, and being intentional about knowing the difference between kind of our ideal, the perfect, what would be a perfect scenario, and the difference to kind of where we are currently and how we would think about that. But I'm actually intrigued, so from a data perspective, right, and I know Dean put up there a whole bunch of numbers around the whys. How many hours did you calculate roughly? 600 and some thousand hours that we believe that people are using to report data to the department, and we're spending that time, and somehow he did some math on calculations, and we ended up with 400 years at of time that that we're spending there. And so if we imagine, what would be the perfect, I think Jill had, I don't know where Jill's at, right there, right in front of me. So I thought it was hilarious, because somebody stood up and asked the question yesterday about, what's the process going to be to fix mistakes? And you basically said, we just aren't going to have any mistakes. And so she defined the perfect yesterday on how we had built a reporting system to ensure that we could get that done. But as we talked about setting what perfect is, and perfect seems unattainable.
Right, and it is.
And it is, right? But it's better to set that type of perfect aspiration and track your progress towards the perfect than it is to set a artificial goal and hit that goal. Is that what you mean by your 5 million and 10 million kind of comparison?
Yeah, if you say, going back to what you're saying about what would perfect be in data coming into the state? And this is the kind of the foundation for strategic planning. The first step in strategic planning is what would perfect be? So perfect would be no errors coming in. It's like a car manufacturer. Perfect would be no warranty repairs. Neither are going to happen. Not going to happen. Okay?
Sorry, Jill.
Okay. So perfect is no errors coming into the department. You have that. Then the next step is, where are we now? And she'll be able to tell you with the new system. She'll be able to tell you how many errors. Right. And so then there's a gap between where we are now and what perfect is. And in the books that I've read on Toyota and their look at that, they call that gap waste. We would call it opportunity. We have nicer words for it. But they call it waste. And it's a total waste of time to have warranty repairs on cars. That's a waste of time and money. But they know they'll never be perfect. There'll always be some waste. So then the goal is, if you move closer to perfect, you have improved. Even though you know you will never ever be perfect, and there'll never ever, that's job security. There's always going to be some errors that need to be fixed, right? Okay? But you want fewer and fewer and fewer errors. That's what we do with the system, is keep reducing that and reducing it, knowing we'll never get there. In a school, you've got somebody there that's responsible for discipline when kids are referred to the office. So what is perfect discipline? No office referrals for the whole year. That's what you're after. That's perfect. And then you can say, well, where are we now? And you say, well, we had 75 last year. So then all of those are a waste of time. So then what do we do to move closer to that? I was a principal I worked with in Minnesota that had this in mind. And one of his best ways of moving closer to no referrals to the office was he brought in these troublemakers that were the ones that he saw a lot, okay? And he brought them in as a group and said, the reason you guys are here is because you have the most office referrals for discipline. Can you kids tell me how to make this a better school? They had the best ideas of anybody of how to make it a better school. And he implemented a couple of their ideas, and they got even closer to perfect because they knew. They were customers of the system. They knew, okay? And so that's it. Perfect. And here where we are now, there's waste, and we move closer. I like the word, by the way, hypothesis versus plan. So a hypothesis is, we don't know if this will move us closer to perfect or not. We have no idea. It's a hypothesis. We'll test it out and see if it does. If it doesn't, okay, well, that was a bad hypothesis. Now let's establish a new one. Whereas when it's a plan, our ego gets tied to it. And we want it to be successful because it's my plan. But hypothesis is, nobody really owns it. It's out there in the ether system somewhere, okay? Can we establish hypotheses? And that's true with all of our data system. Here's perfect, no errors. If we try this, could that bring us closer? Let's give it a try. Test it. Gather the data. We'll find out.
So when we start to think, we also talk root cause, right? So
Yes.
There's always some notion of, hey, look, there's a reason that we're struggling to get to perfect, or there's a reason that we're doing that. So I'll use data collection, and I know we do a lot of training, and we try to build systems that try to minimize the number of errors that might happen, and we still end up in that. But when we think about root cause, what causes an error in a specific area? And perhaps anybody from our data team know what's kind of like a big cause of it? Probably usually like human error, data entry. Is that one of them, or what's a big cause for? Say that.
Oh, I was just thinking
Not understanding direction. So that's a really good example, right? So if it's not clear on
Okay.
how we're supposed to do that, and we take a root cause approach, how do we start addressing those types of things? And I think we'll see some similarities of what
We will.
yeah.
The biggest difference between root cause analysis and normal is we blame. So in Phoenix is where the Veterans Administration problems came to light. And so what was the response from Washington, D.C. to solve the Veterans Administration healthcare problem? They fired the top person, and now it's all fixed.
I don't know if I'm liking this story.
Well, it didn't work. Okay.
Oh, good.
It didn't work. Okay. It did not work. Okay. So Dr. Deming said in Japan, when things go wrong, they ask why until they find out why. In the United States, when things go wrong, we ask why until we find a who. Okay? And so root cause analysis is deeply embedded in finding out why instead of pointing fingers at a who. And so that's the mindset. Why did this happen? There was a story of nurses giving out the wrong medication in the hospital. That's a huge issue. And they found out that as they dealt through the root cause of the problem, it was where they put their laptops on a cart at night to be recharged. There was a drinking fountain right next to it, and when people came to get a drink, it splashed and it shorted out the charging stations. And so that when they came to work the next day, their computers weren't charged. And so then they were guessing. So who would think a drinking fountain would be a root cause of giving the wrong prescriptions? But that's what you ask why, and then why, and then why. You keep digging down. And so then you say, well, they didn't understand the directions. Well, then the next thing was, well, why didn't they? What didn't they understand? It's not just, well, they didn't understand. They must be not very smart. No. What didn't they understand? And then you keep digging down then you fix it. Yeah.
So we do quite a bit of that. I'm thinking you ought to ask me some questions, and this is the dangerous part of the show. This is like the high wire act, I guess, for me. For you, you just get to put me on the high wire, I guess, so to say. You get to play Leslie Stahl to my Betsy DeVos, and let's see how this goes. So ask me some hard questions, Lee.
If you had some advice for the United States Department of Education, what would it be?
Fire the leader, I guess.
Yeah.
Might not be the root cause.
Might not be the root.
So ask me, yeah. What else? Actually, from the relationship with the department and the U.S. Department of Education, all the way down to school, we are doing a lot of things. In fact, all of you are largely in this room, and we've been in this room for or maybe not this room, but for a decade. We've had this type of conference and conversation around data systems, and a lot of that's driven down to us. I call it sometimes adopting solutions to other people's problems, right? So, so we have federal policy that we try to carry out, and we're trying to think of ways that we can do that as effectively as possible. About 8-9% of the federal of the state education, K-12 education funding comes from the federal government, about 8-9% of that. And so it's a substantial investment, and so
Sure.
they have a right to be able to ask us some questions in order for us to have those resources. But our challenge, I think, is figuring out how we spend those resources most effectively. We're writing a new ESSA plan, and our team that's worked on that so hard has been critical for that, but it's largely around data. Mm-hmm. It's largely them asking us to be accountable for equity and think through that our students are receiving those types of opportunities and being able to drive that. And so we look at it and we're trying to define what we think the perfect ought to be in our relationship with the federal government. And I think schools should be asking what's perfect in the relationship with the Department of Education, and we want that to work well. But we find ourselves somewhat in the middle of that on occasion. And maybe it's the challenge that, so to say, we signed up for. But for us to make that really work effectively, we need each partner to play their role as appropriately as possible. And so, we continue to strive towards that from a perfect relationship with U.S. Department of Ed as well.
And you have some room for growth.
Yes, we do. We think they have room for growth in particular, just like, that's how that goes.
Well, okay, I Google alerts, so I put in there Matt Bloomstead, and so, so if you're in the newspaper, it shows up on my phone. So one of the ones that was just really exciting to me was that you got it changed so that spouses of military can teach in Nebraska with the credential they have from whatever state they were in, and that's removing barriers. And I think you were probably more happy about it than I was, but I think that's huge. And so everybody wants their boss to remove barriers. And the way it works is,
My team in particular, by the way.
right, okay, okay. Well, okay, the people who are, the workers, they know the barriers, and they have no power to remove them. And the bosses have power to remove the barriers, but they don't know what they are. So that's the communication part right there, that we actually ask the people, what are the barriers? Students know a lot of barriers that are keeping them from learning their best, but they have no power to change the classroom system. The teacher has the power to change the system, but doesn't know what barriers the kids are thinking about. So anyway, so that's, I'm saying, what are other barriers that you see, that people tell you about, that you'd like to see removed?
So I think we have several, and this is kind of the reality, I think, for us when we look around the state. One barrier is and I think this is kind of an example on the data collection side. Ideally, maybe the perfect would have been the state would have just been able to afford a system, and we rolled it all out, and everyone had the same system, and we could train everyone. And one of the barriers was enough resources to make that happen. Other barriers might have been, Nebraska, like a lot of Midwest states, we always talk about local control, and we're a local control state. I think I've started to understand what that actually means. That actually means that the state doesn't have the money, so hopefully those at the local level could pay for that. I think that's what we mean sometimes. But, I mean, one barrier for us is to think about the resources that come to bear. And so we had to get creative on this. Our story, I think, and it's an important one on even the rollout from NSSRS to advisor, is we asked for resources from the legislature. We got some resources, and I think that came up yesterday, some federal grants that actually helped us advance this particular ball. But I think a lot of it was around, hey, look, that was one of the barriers. And so we didn't remove that barrier. We ended up going around it and circumventing that particular barrier. But I think from a school perspective, we'll hear barriers around, hey, look, we don't have enough staff in a given area. Can you come up with some type of way that we can do that? I think career education was one of these where we created a permit process to think about how we can fill a real void in teachers that happen to be there. I think barriers probably on the data collection side is one's always time, or the amount of time that it takes to actually be able to do that. So we're looking for ways to try to spend less time in some of those processes, spend more time in the types of things that'll make a difference. And so, but I think often we find that removing barriers, and I think we actually implement barriers often. That's part of the job of a regulator. So we're actually trying to transition to how we think of creating an environment that's actually about trying to get the right thing done in the most efficient and effective way, and that's our story.
Right. So the people here, then your commissioner wants to remove barriers,
but I don't know what they are.
Right. Well, you do know a lot,
No,
but
yeah,
there's some you might not know of.
Right.
And they might be something that was put in place 15, 20 years ago for good reasons, but it's still there, and it's wasting time. So yeah, I think it's healthy that you receive such joy from removing barriers. That's the part that's nice. Now we've talked about finance a lot. In my Optimize book, there's a chapter on finance, and it doesn't match the way we keep track of our data. But I want to just throw this out to you on finances. We could put finances into three categories. These are things we spend money on that help kids learn. This is things we spend money on that's like a utility. And these are things that absolutely do nothing for kids learning. And if we looked at it that way, we might find ways that we could reduce the utility spending and not harm learning, and then maybe eliminate some of the things that have no good. So let's think about transportation, for example. What helps kids learn? Well, it's athletic trips and field trips and music trips. We could say that really helps kids learn. What's a utility? Well, home to school. That's a utility cost. What is it we spend money on transportation that does nothing for kids learning? It's the hazardous waste cost for getting rid of the old batteries, getting rid of the old tires, and the used motor oil. Okay? So could we reduce the costs on two of those areas and have more money for field trips so that when they come to the Capitol, they could go by the Department of Ed and meet the commissioner also? Right.
They're excited about that, too.
Right.
So I keep thinking of the rest of the day for folks that are here, and there's a whole bunch of sessions. I think, Lee, you have 4 sessions, is that right?
I have 4, yes.
Wow. We're getting
Well-
our money's worth out of you, Lee.
Well, okay, you're talking about my money's worth. My granddaughter was talking about winning the lottery. And I said, I don't want to win the lottery. And she said, Grandpa, you're the only one I've ever met that doesn't want to win the lottery. I said, well, Samantha, it's not that I would mind being rich. I just would like to earn it. That would be more fun to earn it than to have it given to me. So yes, I do want to earn my keep while I'm here, yes.
Yeah. So we have a few different tracks, one on leadership. So I wanted to talk just a little bit about the role of leadership at a school level and at a building level and a lot of different things that have to happen. And so, I've learned from you over the years this notion of removing barriers, but really providing a system of supports for those that are there. What's the conversation that principals and superintendents might have around data and how they can be supportive of the kind of data collection processes, data use processes?
Okay.
What are the types of things and practices
Well,
that you've seen that would be
I
helpful?
would say the number one tool that administrators have for the use of data is addition. Okay? It's simple addition. Add it up. If you go into a school with 3 third grades, the tendency in our country is that if there's data, we want to make it a contest between the 3 third grades. And so then we have a first place, a second place, and a loser. Okay? And that's the wrong use of data. But if you just add it up, what the 3 are doing together, then the kids are really inspired to try to get the total up for 3rd grade. It's addition. It's for the whole school. You walk into there's a lot of schools in Nebraska where you walk in and right by the office, there is a graph that's the total every week for the whole school. It's addition, okay? And so I would say that is one of the best tools for an administrator is just adding. And then with the effect size that John Hattie's been teaching through the visible learning, we've learned from him, and that is not addition, it's really averaging the effect size from every classroom and sharing that information. But if the administrator does nothing, the default is ranking. So we say, kids, we want you to learn to be competitive, and we want you to learn to be competitive through sports and games. And we want you to be cooperative, and that's through academics. We don't care if there's a loser in dodgeball. But it's great when you have a bracket and you have winners and losers in dodgeball and soccer. That's great, okay? But not in academics. That's where we average and we add in order to build that growth with the use of the data. So that's the most powerful tool is simple addition. Add it up and say, wow, look what we all did together.
So collectively winning, right, is
Yes.
one of the kind of that particular theme. So when I think about this from the data that Dean shared, if we reduce the number of hours and if we could calculate, and be able to maintain that, and then we thought about what this type of data change really meant to the state of Nebraska, because if we started to convert that to we have more time to do things that matter to students, that's really what we're here for. That's our hope, is that we're able to be as efficient and effective as possible with that particular data effort.
So, and what I'd said earlier is that the data piece, it's not that data that goes to you and then to the federal government is not directly impacting all the kids. It's more of a utility in a sense, okay, and a necessary one. But if we could do that in a way that saves time, and sometimes it's even in, when superintendents get together, or the people that have raised their hand that are in the data collection, you get together with your people in other places, how much time did you spend on it? How much time did you spend? How much time did you spend? Wow, you did it in that much time? That little bit of time? What'd you do? Let's learn from each other and reduce it. Yes, so we can spend more time with a direct assistance to the kids.
So one of our, kind of as we keep looking and thinking about what really motivates and starts to tell the story for Nebraska and for as we move forward, we've done a lot of things with AQuest, rethinking what the accountability system is, not using just singularly assessment data, but thinking about other types of data that are important to us as we get better at understanding connections between, and I'll pick on like attendance and how students achieve, or student engagement in some type of measure or metric of how we do that. Have you seen from and maybe at a state or at least maybe a large school district level, the use of data that might help us think about that system level improvement for key things like student engagement?
Okay. Yes, there's several places in Nebraska that are, and one in Arizona, experimenting with me on an idea for measuring engagement. And I would, and really it's measuring intrinsic motivation in a sense, okay? And it's self-assessment. But John Hattie gave us the triplets, skill, will, and thrill. And so we measure skill in other ways, but their effort, how hard are they working? And then, and I will show the data from this in one of my seminars, how hard are they working and how much do they enjoy it? So the scale is, I'm putting in no effort to I'm giving 100% effort, and there's a scale, okay? And that's on a matrix, and along the y-axis. And along the x-axis, it's, I hate it, I dislike it, it's okay, I like it, and I love this class, okay? And the kids will put a dot on that chart, on that sheet of paper, where they are. And they say, what you'd like is the kid to say, I give him 100% effort, and I love it. That's in the upper right corner. But you might get a kid that says, I'm doing nothing and I hate it, and the dot's in the lower left corner of that matrix. But they all put dots on there, and it gives you feedback on how are we doing in measuring their effort and their joy. And we do it once a month. It's a minute per kid per month, not even that long. They put a dot, and the teacher has a perfect picture of exactly what you talked about. Because if they're highly engaged, you're going to accelerate their intrinsic motivation. And if they're not engaged, yeah.
We lose them. And I'll kind of tell this little story of myself, I guess, because I think I've shared with this group before. My second daughter, when I was first named commissioner, she goes to school and says something to her classmates. The reason that we have to do this NSSRS assessment is because of my dad, right? And so that particular personal analysis of how things work in our household. And you've talked to my kids. I've had you talk to them because they use Delta J on or have at least at some grade levels. But one of the things about their other motivation, and I was somewhat surprised at it because as we rolled out NSCAS this year with 3 through 8 using NWEA, a similar platform, certainly an intent of something that many students have seen across the state before. And my oldest daughter, the same one that said the reason that we have to do this, has suddenly become a NISA fan, and I didn't realize this because she told me, Dad, I really don't, she's an 8th grader now, Dad, I really don't like the fact that you created this change, because in the old system I could go back and check and come back to a question and actually work on that. In this new system where we try to have computer adaptive assessment, she couldn't go back and do that. So I was getting chewed out, but it got worse. It got worse this way because I was getting chewed out by the 8th grader. Well, I have a 6th grader and a 4th grader. Luckily, the 2nd grader wasn't chewing on me yet, but I've got the other 3. They were all saying, hey, look, change is really a tough thing for us to manage, Dad. And I'm thinking, well, this is interesting because I suspect that there's probably other students all across the state. And I think the very next day, we got an email that came to the department with that very same complaint. So, one of the dynamics is we implement changes that we think are actually going to be good and good for the system overall, and we end up in this kind of what I would say difficulty of going, just the change itself has a negative impact, regardless if the intention is that it would be a good change in the long run. How do we deal with it? This is how I dealt with it with my kids, because this is what a dad would say to their kids. You know how much money we spent on that? Is what I said. But what are the types of things we do when we're trying to inspire changes on a system? How do we do that? I have a whole room full of people that they probably felt just like my kid. Why are we making this change for? Why are we doing that? How do we think about that kind of change management and what the motivations are. What do we need to communicate? What are the types of things, I was going to say good leaders do, because I wouldn't know. So I have no idea what a good leader might do to really kind of inspire that type of, this change is coming for a good purpose.
Well, maybe, you got the opinion of the kids.
Yes, well, I did that loud
You
and
got
clear.
that, okay. What comes to mind is just the simple plus delta that's been around for years. What went well with the new assessment system, and that's in one column, and then the other column is what could we change to make it better? And they have a lot of ideas, and in education, educators are generally very good at listening one-on-one to kids, but we're not as good at listening corporately to everybody together. And they have a lot of ideas. My favorite story was a high school history teacher who always did it every month. What went well in our class this month? What can I do to make next month better? And a student wrote, when you promise us 10 minutes, give us 10 minutes. And so she went back to the kids and said, don't I do that? And they said, no. Said, well, what do I do? They said, Mrs. Carson, you are hyper. After 7 minutes, you say time's up. If it's only 7, just tell us it's 7, but don't tell us it's 10 and cut us off at 7. Well, then what do you want me to do about it? And the kid said, let one of us be timekeeper. Problem solved. She did it. Okay? So I think when you go back to this, it's okay, this was hard, this was a change. What went well, though, it wasn't all bad on the new test. What went well on the new test, and what could we change to make it better next year? And they have wonderful ideas that we're not always gathering, or they haven't thought about. There was one part they didn't like. They didn't tell you the three or four parts they did like, and they didn't give you their ideas. So I think it goes back to listening. What can we do to make it better next year?
So when we try to effectuate change, there's forces on either side. I was wondering if you wanted to use one of those ideas I rejected earlier to demonstrate this.
Yeah, how much time do we have?
I think we got about, 5 minutes?
Okay.
5, 6 minutes?
Nick, is that right? Nick, where are you? Yeah, come on up here. Okay, I want you to stand right here.
I rejected this idea, just so you know.
Okay. Okay, stand right here in the middle. If you haven't met him, he's the new chair of the leadership, administration and leadership at Nebraska. It's got that big red N on there. That's the one right there, right? And okay, but his name right now is Status Quo. No, status quo. Okay, so how do we get status quo? Dean and Deb, come on up here. Come on up here. Okay? So we've got status quo, and they work for the department, and they have the best ideas on how to get us to move away from status quo. No, you need to put your hand on a shoulder and over here and push. You're pushing to get status quo to change, okay? And we're pushing. So go ahead, give a little push. Okay, so no, keep going. Yeah, it's working a little bit. Yeah, okay. Now, okay, so it looks like we're making progress. But then what happens? Oh, let's see. Katie and, what was your name again? Jill, come on up here, Jill. Katie and Jill, okay. They are opposed to the change. They're not happy with it. Would you kind of poke on his shoulder there? Okay. Okay. So okay, listen, you guys want the change. Push. Okay, you don't want the change. Push back. Okay, push. Come on, let's go. Push. God, 10 years later, we still have status quo. Okay, you can take your seats down.
And you got a university guy being status quo.
Right. So that's how we get status quo, is that the pressure to change and the pressure to not change are equal. And so people think outside of our field, well, the reason it stays the same is because nobody's doing anything. They got their head in the sand. The reason it is not changing is because everybody's working so hard in opposite directions, okay? So the job of this guy right here is to get these people to move to the other side and to help so we can move off of status quo, right?
Right.
Okay.
Swim in the same direction.
Right.
Push in the same direction.
Yeah, okay. Because if you don't, you get status quo. It's a hurricane. and it's not moving.
And the university was the barrier. Did I
No,
miss
no,
that?
no, I didn't say that. I didn't say that.
I'm sorry.
No.
I didn't understand either. Okay.
I said that the person in the room who is 6'10" represents
Yes.
status quo.
Yeah.
That was the message.
That's what the message was. Okay.
Yes, okay.
Well, I just, first of all, I think it's been great fun to be able to kind of banter a little bit. One of the intriguing parts, I think, for us as an agency is that very battle constantly. There's different barriers that get in our way of trying to move certain things, different reasons that we would leave things the same as they are, because sometimes just not making a change is actually somewhat easier than making a change, right? That we can hang back and not have to do that. What I want to do just kind of quickly is really recognize our department team that has worked so hard of trying to implement this very same system. So I'd ask you just to stand up, everyone from the department and our data, actually just everybody from the department that have worked so hard to try to implement these types of changes. And let's give them just a little round of applause. So I'm going to do something else. I'm going to ask everyone else in the room to stand up while the department staff sits, because I would like everyone else in the room to stand up. And you have been critical as partners for this very type of work. You are here, and I feel like preaching to the choir probably just a little bit. But would everyone else in the room stand up? And just first of all, you can turn and pat your neighbor on the back, because I can't do it out there for you. But thank you for what you've done all across the state of Nebraska. Thank you for being the leaders that we need to make a difference in our state. Thank you for doing what you do on a daily basis to try to improve educational outcomes, to try to give us data so we can have the federal government tell us how we're doing. Thank you for all of that particular work. I thank you, Lee. I don't know if there's anything you want to say in the end, but thank you very much for being here today.
Well, thank you. You having worked in California and in my public school career, and I just want to say you are so fortunate to have this guy helping out. You really are. To have somebody who has this much passion and care about all of you is instead of just the politics, is not normal. So it's a joy to be
I'm
with
not
you. Thank
normal.
you.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, you're not. You're not.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.